The most important thing there is to know your partner. You really need to be confident in the business strategy of those with whom you're investing. It's very difficult to invest all alone in China. It's very important to have a reliable partner. Part of that is relationship with the central government of China and the local governments. And part of it is trust. It's difficult to work out disagreements in China's courts. So you really need to trust with whom you're working and be confident that their business plan has a good shot. Of course, there's risk everywhere, but I think those are the keys that we've been told about. Well, first of all, capital markets are, to a large extent, closed. You can't simply inject capital into China's economy right now without permission from the government. So that's the first hurdle that you need to get over, is to get permission to invest. And then once you get through that, the key concerns are the ones that I mentioned earlier: investing with a trusted partner and a business plan that makes a lot of sense. Of course, having a business plan that doesn't run counter to the interests of the government is very important in China, because it's not a completely open, free market like it is in the United States. The Chinese use the expression state-directed capitalism, which means that the state does play a significant role in the economy. And if you should run cross-purposes with the intentions of the government, you may find yourself in difficulty. I'll give you one example. In the United States, when a firm borrows money in debt capital markets, investors are very aware that if the firm is risky, that either you don't lend it money, or if you do, you lend it at a very high interest rate. And the result of that is that capital gets allocated to the firms with the best business plans. In China, that hasn't been working so well for two reasons. Number one, for whatever reason, default is considered an extremely adverse result in China relative to the U.S. And when a corporation gets into trouble, either its local government or the central government is very prone to bail it out, which means that if I'm an investor in corporate bonds, I don't really care all that much about which bonds I invest in. Most of them are going to pay off anyway. And that means that companies with the best business plans have not a very, very big advantage relative to companies that don't really have a good business plan at all. The second reason I'm interested in it is that China has only a very nascent bond market. In the United States, roughly 2/3 of corporate credit is provided through securities markets. In China, it's just a tiny, tiny fraction. Shockingly, China has as much corporate debt as the United States, but only a tiny, tiny fraction of it is obtained through bond markets. And that means that it's not going to be possible for China to continue to grow at the rate it has been, or anything close, unless it develops a very effective bond market. Because as corporations get larger and larger, they can't rely only on bank loans. They need access to bond markets as well to get cheap enough capital. In China, there are 4 large banks. They're kind of analogous to our J.P. Morgan, Citibank, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, and Wells Fargo, except that these 4 largest banks in China are more than half owned by the central government. And in order to be a CEO of one of these 4 largest banks, you need to be selected by the Chinese Communist Party, and you end up having a sub-ministerial rank or vice-ministerial rank in the Chinese government. You're actually a member of the government, so that when time comes to decide to whom you're going to lend money, a phone call from a government official might be very, very influential. And I think you might have, you'd be surprised if you heard that Jamie Dimon or Lloyd Blankfein would simply pick up the phone and make a loan to someone that at the suggestion of someone in the United States administration. It doesn't work that way in this country. So that's another example of when you look at the bank, it has a CEO, it has a board of directors, it has equity, it has debt, it operates as a corporation with public shareholders, and yet it's as much a part of the government as it is part of financial markets as a private actor. A former senior partner at Goldman Sachs was interviewed by Bloomberg and recalled that in 1990 he suggested that Japan, which was the rising economic superpower, would not succeed. Its growth would stop, and it would have difficulties, perhaps financial crises. And he turned out to be right. Now he's saying the same thing about China and questioning whether this would-be superpower will be able to continue to grow and will be able to avoid a significant financial crisis. He didn't put any hard facts on that. He said it was a hunch. He was very humble about it. But if you don't try to look at the facts, examine the numbers, understand by talking to people what's actually going on, you would be significantly influenced by those kinds of suggestions that China is heading for serious difficulty. I have a kind of moderate view on that. I think China will be able to have a soft landing at a sustainable growth rate of, somewhere between 5 and 7%. It'll be able to pivot towards its consumption sector. Hopefully, it'll be able to reduce the terrible air pollution that its major cities has, and it'll be able to open up its capital markets, and eventually American investors or European investors will be able to go into China, just as Chinese investors will be able to freely invest elsewhere. That vision has been on everyone's mind, for everyone that watches developments in the global financial system. That vision has been on their minds for a decade, and it still seems just over the horizon. Will we ever actually get to that point? I don't know. I think it's a big question mark, but I'm somewhat optimistic that it's a question of time and a question of success for this kind of gradualist policy of trying one thing after another and hoping that enough of these things work that this sort of progress can be made.